My life took an unexpected turn when I discovered that my ex-wife had been unfaithful to me, engaging in a long-term affair with my estranged brother. This revelation came just 2 months ago, shortly after my divorce from my ex-wife, who is 27 years old, while I am 29. I had been blissfully unaware of her infidelity until she broke the shocking news that she was pregnant. Initially, she tried to convince me that the child was mine, but a series of suspicious coincidences involving my brother's frequent visits began to eat away at my doubts. Curiosity turned into concern, and I decided to take matters into my own hands by checking her phone one evening while she was asleep. What I found shattered my world. The texts between my ex and my brother laid bare the truth. Not only had they been involved for quite some time, but my ex had no intention of disclosing that this child was my brother's. Their plan was to wait until after the birth to reveal the affair, after which they would divorce me and pursue a life together, banking on the child support payments I would be obligated to make. The discovery was devastating, marking the end of my 2-year marriage. The betrayal felt even heavier given my tumultuous relationship with my family. Ever since I left home at 18, my parents had always viewed me as an outsider. My brother was the favored one, often referred to as the golden child. There was a memorable incident during my college acceptance celebration when my parents decided to throw a party for my brother instead of me, which they justified by claiming they didn't want him to feel left out. This moment was a turning point for me. I realized I could never return to a family that treated me with such disregard. I worked hard to pay my way through college, taking out loans and juggling multiple jobs, and after graduation, I moved into a small apartment with a friend. For years, I cut ties with my family, and they didn't attempt to reach out to me either. However, last year, my brother surprisingly contacted me through social media, expressing a desire to reconnect with me and my parents, who he claimed missed me. I was leading a comfortable life, having married my ex-wife, but there was still a lingering resentment regarding my treatment by my family. Out of curiosity and perhaps a sense of obligation, I agreed to meet them. The initial reunion was awkward. My family made significant efforts to mend the past, so I felt compelled to reciprocate. I eventually invited them to my home, an invitation I would come to regret. The moment my brother met my ex-wife, it felt like a setup. Their affair blossomed, leading to her pregnancy and the eventual revelation of the truth. At first, I was elated at the news of the pregnancy under the naive assumption that I was going to become a father. However, as my brother continued to visit, the situation became increasingly uncomfortable. I found it odd and intrusive when he placed his hands on my wife's belly and talked to the unborn child. My ex downplayed the situation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more sinister behind their interactions. It all came crashing down 6 months into her pregnancy. My gut feeling pushed me to investigate further, and when I looked through her phone, I found messages that confirmed my worst fears. It was undeniable, my brother was indeed the father, and they had been plotting this entire deception behind my back. The next morning, I confronted my ex, and although she attempted to deny the allegations initially, she eventually admitted to the affair and the conspiracy. This revelation marked the formal end of my marriage, and to my dismay, my parents sided with my brother and ex-wife, completely disregarding my feelings. The assurances they had previously provided about valuing both of us equally turned out to be hollow. When my ex and my brother announced the divorce, it felt like everything I had endured in my life had culminated in this moment of betrayal and heartache. In a shocking turn of events, I found out on social media that my ex-wife had chosen to announce our divorce publicly, along with her decision to marry my brother. The way they both handled the situation was incredibly painful, especially considering that my entire family rallied behind them and expressed their unwavering support for this new union. It felt as though everyone around me had completely disregarded the turmoil I was going through. My mental health had taken a significant hit, and the betrayal I experienced from my ex was further compounded by the fact that she had lied to me for 6 long months, insisting that the baby she was carrying was mine. In that moment, I felt an immense sense of loss, not just for my wife but for what I believed was our child as well. The emotional pain was unbearable. To make matters worse, my parents, rather than comforting me, insisted that this was all for the best. They refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing on my brother's part, choosing instead to encourage me to feel happy for them and to join in on their celebration of love. It was a surreal experience to be pushed aside while my own family chose to support my ex. Eventually, I made the difficult decision to cut them out of my life entirely, a move that only complicated the divorce proceedings further. My ex walked away with a substantial settlement, leaving me with nothing but the house. My car and other possessions were claimed as part of her winnings in this heartbreaking split. Her lawyer had concocted a narrative painting me as the toxic and controlling spouse who had supposedly forced her to quit her job, despite the fact that the decision had been hers alone. My family went along with this damaging portrayal, reinforcing the idea that my so-called misogynistic attitude and temper were the real culprits behind the downfall of my marriage. As a result, the odds were stacked against me in court, and I ended up losing a significant amount of money. The silver lining was that I retained the house when the divorce was finalized, which felt like a small victory in an otherwise lost battle. I was relieved to finally close this painful chapter of my life and to be free from the presence of people who had caused me so much distress. Fortunately for me, there was no waiting period for divorce where I lived, and my ex did not contest the proceedings, allowing me to expedite the finalization. While it was challenging to move past the hurtful events, I threw myself into my work with renewed determination, focusing on personal growth and healing. My hard work paid off just 2 weeks ago when I received a promotion that came with a better position, a higher salary, and an upgraded company car. The sense of accomplishment was overwhelming, and to celebrate, I treated myself to a solo dinner at one of my favorite restaurants. However, in a moment of oversight, I decided to share my celebratory dinner online, which triggered a flurry of unwanted attention. Within a day or two, my mother reached out and insisted that I come visit them. I was genuinely perplexed about what they could possibly want from me after months of silence, especially considering they had supported my ex and her twisted narrative. Despite my initial inclination to ignore her calls, the relentless nature of her attempts eventually forced me to acknowledge her request. After a series of unsuccessful calls, she even showed up at my office, desperate to speak with me, causing a scene with the receptionist that left me embarrassed and frustrated. To appease her, I reluctantly promised to visit in a few days, which finally got her to back off. When I finally did go to see my family, I was struck by what had changed around them. They had moved into a larger house, a clear indication that they had used the settlement money, likely combined with the alimony, to facilitate this upgrade, all in preparation for the arrival of my ex's newborn, who had come into the world just over 3 weeks prior. While the fact that the alimony payments were supporting their new family didn't directly impact me financially, given that it was a small portion of my overall salary, I was still horrified by their blatant disregard for the choices they had made that led to my downfall. My brother wasn't home, and my ex was sleeping, leaving just my parents to confront me. I remained silent, allowing them to speak without any small talk or pleasantries, instead waiting for them to get to the point. After an awkward 5 minutes of silence, my father, with a bluntness that shocked me, revealed that my brother had recently lost his job. The financial strain was becoming too great, and they were struggling to make ends meet. They had seen my post about my promotion and were hoping that I could assist them financially, as they were now running low on funds. I knew their situation all too well, given my brother's lack of employment and the alimony payments that were failing to support a growing family of 5, particularly with a newborn in the mix. What stunned me was the sheer audacity of my parents to approach me for help after supporting my ex and completely disregarding the anguish they had caused me. After everything that transpired, I found myself in a state of complete shock, so much so that I couldn't muster a single word for several minutes. It felt as if time had come to a standstill while my mind tried to process the chaotic whirlwind of events that had just unfolded. Eventually, clarity returned, and I realized that entertaining this situation was not something I wanted to do. With that thought in mind, I stood up and left without uttering a single word. As I approached the door and opened it, I was met with the sight of my brother waiting outside. My parents were behind me, urging me to stay and listen to their explanations. My brother's expression was a mix of surprise and concern upon seeing me there, but I remained silent and continued my exit. The rain was pouring heavily, and the brief walk to my car, which was parked on their lawn, felt like an eternity. I quickly became completely drenched, and my already foul mood worsened. At this point, I acknowledge I might have acted a bit harshly. My parents and brother followed me outside, desperate to make one last appeal for my assistance. It was my brother leading the charge this time, which was an unusual sight. His typical demeanor had always been smug and condescending, shaped by the treatment we received from our parents. Seeing him ask for help was disconcerting and suggested that they were genuinely in a tough spot. However, I felt a surge of frustration welling up inside me. I lost my temper and snapped at them, telling them to leave me alone and that if they were truly desperate for money, they could beg on the streets. I was convinced that a kind stranger would be more likely to sympathize with them than I ever could. With that, I climbed into my car and drove away, leaving them behind in the downpour. I won't deny that there was a certain satisfaction in doing this to my family, especially after the years of mistreatment I had endured at their hands. It has now been 2 days since that incident, and I find myself questioning my decision. My mother has been incessantly texting me, sending messages that tug at my guilt. Every text serves as a reminder of the help they now need, and I can't shake the feeling that I should have done something. I know that I have more than enough to spare, and sending them a little cash wouldn't make a significant dent in my finances. Yet, after everything that's happened, it feels like I would simply be playing into their hands, enabling them to continue their past behaviors. Reflecting on my choices, I came to the realization that my family has abandoned me time and again, particularly during the divorce when they chose to side with my ex. Why should I feel obligated to extend support to them now? I made it clear to my mother that if she didn't stop bothering me, I would have no choice but to involve my lawyers, and that would certainly not end well for them. Naturally, this did not sit well with them. Shortly after, my brother showed up at my house, seeking to talk. He expressed his sympathy over my treatment throughout our childhood, but then he made a statement that took me off guard. He claimed that he was inherently better than me, which justified how he was treated by our parents. It was baffling to hear such arrogance, especially when all I wanted was a little acknowledgement for my struggles. He went on to suggest that I ought to stop being difficult and help our parents, as any normal child would do in their time of need, rather than harboring grudges like a petulant child. I couldn't help but laugh at his absurdity. His arguments felt completely disconnected from reality. I told him instead of trying to manipulate me into helping, he should focus on finding a job rather than wasting his time with me. That hit a nerve, and he exploded in anger, accusing me of being jealous that our parents and even my ex-wife preferred him over me. His words bounced off me like water off a duck's back. I simply agreed with him, stating that my refusal to help was indeed a form of revenge against him, and that there wasn't much he could do about it. This only fueled his rage further. He threatened that he would come after me to ensure I paid up, warning me that I'd regret speaking to him in such a manner. However, I dismissed his threats. They didn't hold any weight for me. At the very least, he can try to intimidate me all he wants, but it's simply not going to work. I have a solid understanding that he lacks the capability to affect me in any meaningful way. I find myself completely unbothered by his attempts. Recently, 3 days ago, my brother came to visit me, attempting to persuade me to assist them in their current situation. However, his efforts were in vain. My parents had already made similar attempts in the past, and those efforts turned out to be fruitless as well. This time around, my ex decided to reach out to me directly and have a conversation. Initially, I was hesitant about answering her call. Ultimately, I decided to pick up, thinking that if I didn't, they might show up at my door again, wasting even more of my time. As I spoke with her, I was struck by just how entitled and cruel some people can be. She began our conversation in a polite manner, addressing the fact that, as I already knew, her family was facing financial difficulties. She acknowledged that I had no obligation to help them, especially after all they had put me through, but she still urged me to consider stepping up and being the bigger person in this situation. In an effort to evoke some sympathy from me, she reminded me that my parents had provided for all my needs throughout my upbringing and that she had done her utmost to be a good wife. However, I found her statements utterly disingenuous. My parents were emotionally absent, showing blatant favoritism toward my brother, and, ironically, she had betrayed my trust by cheating on me with that very brother. Given this context, her appeal to my sense of morality fell flat. I expressed to her that, while I felt terrible about the hardships they were experiencing, I was already burdened with paying her alimony. Technically, she didn't even deserve it, considering her infidelity, but she had managed to manipulate the situation in her favor. My family had no qualms about distorting the truth to cast me in a negative light for their own gain. During our conversation, she broke down in tears, accusing me of being selfish and heartless. The irony was not lost on me, especially given her track record of betrayal. She asserted that my brother had been right all along, claiming that I had left her with no choice but to involve legal authorities. Furthermore, she threatened to demand an increase in alimony and to drag me to court, not hesitating to remind me that she could potentially humiliate me once again. Looking back at the first time we went through this, I felt emotionally drained and defeated. I hadn't fought back against the accusations or attempted to clear my name. I simply wanted the entire ordeal to end, even if that meant conceding to their demands. I never was toxic or controlling, as they had portrayed me, and yet here I was, being forced to pay her as if she had any claim to my money. I made the decision to just let it go at that time, desperately wanting closure regardless of the financial repercussions. Now, however, I feel different. This time, I am prepared to stand my ground and assert myself, determined to teach my family a lesson that they will not forget easily. In a surprising turn of events, my ex-wife followed through on her threats and actually filed for an increased alimony amount, citing the recent promotion I had received at work. This time, though, I was not going to let things unfold without a fight. I reached out to our mutual friends to inform them of the situation, filling them in on the details that they were previously unaware of. Most of them only knew that we had separated, without any knowledge of the deeper, more painful truths behind our split. They were understandably shocked at the revelations I shared and quickly agreed to support me if it came down to needing witnesses in court. Additionally, I contacted my lawyer to inform him of my decision to terminate the alimony arrangement altogether, as I firmly believed that she did not deserve any of it after everything that had happened. Over the past few days, I have been diligently gathering every piece of evidence I could find to showcase the toxic dynamic within my family, highlighting their mistreatment of me throughout the years. It was clear to me that they were now trying to exploit my newfound success and that I had had enough. I was determined to rid myself of these parasitic individuals once and for all. Their feelings were the least of my concerns as I focused on reclaiming my life. I enlisted the help of some of my cousins who had witnessed the injustices I faced growing up, and they generously agreed to speak on my behalf. It was a long time coming, but I was finally ready to take a stand. Despite the fact that my relationship with my lawyer was never particularly intimate, I could sense his satisfaction when he reviewed the information we had gathered. He expressed confidence that our findings would create a case so solid that it might finally free me from the obligation of paying alimony. The situation surrounding my divorce was already known, particularly the infidelity of my ex-wife. However, the narrative spun by my ex, which portrayed me as the antagonist and my brother as the gallant savior, was riddled with falsehoods. In previous encounters, I had chosen not to defend myself against their claims. This time, however, I was resolute in my intent to correct the misconceptions they had created about me. I came prepared with compelling evidence, video testimonials from friends and relatives that supported my side of the story. These recordings explicitly demonstrated that the characterization my family had constructed was entirely fabricated, and I was not the villain they made me out to be. It became clear that my family had assumed they could evade accountability once again, just as they had managed to do in the past. However, I had undergone significant personal growth during this tumultuous period. The emotional struggles I had faced only fortified my resolve, and I was no longer the fragile person they once manipulated. The court proceedings concluded yesterday, and I received the exhilarating news that I would no longer be required to pay alimony to my ex, largely due to the new evidence we presented. The joy I felt in that moment was indescribable. The satisfaction of seeing my family's smug expressions replaced with shock was exhilarating, and my ex-wife looked as if she were on the verge of tears. At that moment, I realized I had moved beyond caring about her distress. I was simply done with this chapter of my life. I had envisioned returning home to indulge in some delicious takeout and enjoy a movie, but my family seemed determined to thwart any attempt I made to embrace happiness. As I approached my home, I spotted my brother's car parked outside, raising immediate confusion within me. Entering the house, I was met by my family blocking my way, their presence unexpected and unsettling. I felt bewildered and momentarily at a loss for words, yet I resolved to maintain my composure. I instructed them to leave my property, warning them that I would call the police if they refused. In response, my father reprimanded me, claiming I should feel ashamed for my actions that day. He launched into a lecture about my supposed lack of family responsibility and accused me of betraying them in their time of need. After he finished his tirade, I opted not to engage in a conversation with him, choosing instead to remain silent. My strategy was to deny them the satisfaction of provoking an emotional response from me, as I suspected that was their intent. They likely aimed to ignite a confrontation that would lead me to act impulsively and irrationally. Their desperate tactics were futile, and it seemed they failed to grasp that their efforts were only exacerbating my resolve. My silence appeared to frustrate them further, prompting my mother to demand that I show my father respect and speak to him. I continued to refuse, observing their escalating agitation. They clearly anticipated a dramatic showdown, but that simply wasn't happening. After several minutes of yelling and escalating tensions, my brother lost his temper. In a sudden move, he grabbed me by the collar, attempting to strike me. Fortunately, my father intervened just in time, shouting insults about how I was nothing but a jealous loser destined for failure. It struck me as amusing that this accusation came from someone who was unemployed, living with our parents, and relying on me for financial support. I reiterated that they needed to leave my property or I would indeed call the police. Faced with the prospect of legal trouble, they grudgingly started to exit, but not before my mother made one last desperate attempt to guilt me into giving them money. Ultimately, her efforts were in vain, and they finally departed. It has now been nearly a day since that incident. It has now been nearly 24 hours since I last heard from them, and I can't help but feel a sense of hope that this silence will persist. With that in mind, I'm ready to move on to the next chapter of my life, which brings me to the second story, one that has deeply affected my life. It was a harsh revelation when I found out that my wife had been unfaithful, and to make matters worse, it was with the father of my stepdaughter. As a result, I made the decision to divorce her without hesitation. My wife, who is 33 years old, cheated on me back in December. I had the heartbreaking experience of walking in on them at his house, a scenario I had sensed was unfolding. This man has been someone I've had to confront on numerous occasions over the years to keep him from trespassing on our property, often managing his anger with restraint. My daily routine was one of exhausting labor, as I dedicated myself to maintaining our household, caring for our pets, managing the yard, and looking after her daughter from a previous relationship. When we got married, my wife insisted that I donate my older vehicle so that I could drive one of her cars instead. I even picked up part-time work at the law firm where she was employed to contribute financially. My day-to-day life was a whirlwind, starting as early as 6 a.m. and ending well past 2 a.m. On many nights, all due to the multitude of chores and responsibilities that fell on my shoulders. Despite my attempts to be forgiving, I continued to discover her communicating with him and scheming to meet up with other men while she repeatedly claimed she wanted our marriage to succeed. Throughout this turmoil, she subjected me to emotional and sexual abuse, turning the blame for her infidelity back on me, suggesting that I was at fault for not preventing it. She manipulated me through guilt, often using threats to force intimacy even when it was clear I was not ready. Following one of my discoveries about her cheating, she became pregnant. However, when I requested a DNA test for paternity, she hastily opted for an abortion, immediately scapegoating me for the choice. After enduring this distressing situation, I made the decision last month to leave her and quit my job. Since that moment, my family has provided unwavering support, but I find myself grappling daily with the struggle to get out of bed or even care for myself. Our marriage lasted less than a year, and now, I am receiving no spousal support, have no vehicle, and had to leave my job. I've lost touch with half of my family, her family, and my stepdaughter, leaving me homeless and nearly broke. If it weren't for my family's assistance, I would be facing complete homelessness. Currently, my mental health is in a precarious state as I come to terms with the reality that she was likely unfaithful even during our dating period. Everything about our relationship feels deceptively orchestrated, and now I am left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. I find it exceedingly difficult to navigate the aftermath of being cheated on and abused while feeling as though I am the only one bearing the consequences of these actions. My lawyer, who is also a trusted family friend, has informed me that there is little recourse available to address my situation. Amid this emotional turmoil, I ponder how to heal. I understand the need to take small, manageable steps, such as seeking another job, but even the thought of leaving the house feels like an insurmountable challenge. I am battling severe depression and anxiety, and even socializing with friends takes a significant toll on my mental well-being, often resulting in emotional breakdowns on my drive home. I feel fundamentally broken, and it seems that nothing is improving. In an unsettling twist, my ex-wife intends to bring her affair partner to our divorce hearing, a move that feels like a final blow to my dignity. I've received mixed opinions from friends about whether to confront them directly or to simply try to ignore their presence. As I navigated the emotional aftermath of my ex-wife's betrayal, my divorce hearing finally arrived. In the days leading up to this moment, I had been reflecting on the abuse I endured after discovering her with another man in our home shortly after Christmas. I attempted to work through our issues, but the repeated discoveries of her continued contact with him and her interactions with other men quickly made it clear that reconciliation was not possible. In a moment of clarity, I ultimately decided to leave her, filing for divorce despite her threats against my well-being. Now, as I return home from the courthouse, I feel a renewed sense of strength, having hit personal records at the gym. I am rekindling my sense of self, and though my ex-wife no longer knows my whereabouts or my new employment as I've moved away, I am slowly reclaiming my life. Despite having given everything for our relationship, she took so much from me: my job, my vehicle, my home, my family connections, my marriage, and my mental stability. Though it is painful, I am learning to heal and find stability again. Despite my firm belief that the child was fathered by her affair partner, she made the decision to terminate the pregnancy. The entire year has been a relentless nightmare for me. Throughout this challenging time, she continuously accused me of abandoning her and fracturing our family. When she arrived this morning, I was already engaged in discussions with my lawyer. We simply needed to be there for the paperwork to be finalized by the judge. I refrained from making any eye contact with her, even when she attempted to give me some mail from our house. I took the envelope without hesitation and continued on my way, not paying her any mind. It struck me as peculiar that the affair partner hadn't accompanied her, especially since she had been telling our mutual friends he would be there with her. Although I was feeling immense stress and emotional turmoil on the inside, I managed to wear a gentle smile and maintain a positive demeanor. She seemed as though she was on the verge of tears, yet I didn't acknowledge her feelings. It wasn't until I returned home that I discovered a note intertwined with the mail. The reason the affair partner was absent was because he had gotten another woman pregnant. Upon reading that, I ripped the note into shreds and tossed it in the trash. She had a devoted husband, yet she chose to cheat, deceive, and hurt me until I finally walked away from the relationship. All of this pain and betrayal were for someone who was simultaneously seeing other women. What's even more disheartening is the knowledge that this affair partner despises fatherhood. He has shown a pattern of being lazy, and when he was with my ex-wife, he was abusive. He often leaves his daughter with his mother every time he gets the chance to care for her. In fact, she refers to him by his first name while she calls me dad, simply because she barely knows him. His own mother expressed her joy on Christmas, drinking with me and sharing how grateful she was that her granddaughter had me in her life. Now, with this new baby on the way, I fear that it will only complicate his life further. My only wish is that the woman he is having this child with will find a way to escape from him quickly, for the sake of that innocent baby. Even though I try to exude high energy and positivity, I am feeling a profound sense of solitude today. My emotional state is fluctuating between moments of happiness and periods of deep melancholy. It's hard to articulate exactly what I'm experiencing. I had anticipated that things would feel lighter, but honestly, I wish none of us were enduring this pain.